Hello and welcome back to another video in our series on robotic process automation using Power Automate Desktop. My name is Devin. I'm the president of training at Pragmatic Works. We do a lot of Power Platform training, not just Power Automate, but also Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, Power Virtual Agents. And in this video, though, we're going to be extending on an example that we've been doing over the last several videos, where we're walking through an example of building out a flow and adding a little bit to it inside of Power Automate Desktop over time. So we started off with a basic flow, we added in some variables, we showed how you can then pass in values into those variables. You can find those earlier videos in the description of this video if you want to go back and see how I got to where I'm at today. You can kind of find how we did this. But what we're going to be doing today is a little bit more of an advanced scenario, where we're going to be showing how I can loop over or iterate over a list of values that we have, whether that be in a SQL database or an Excel file. We're going to be using an Excel file for this example, so that way you can replicate this on your own. But we're going to show how inside of Power Automate Desktop you can iterate or loop over a set of values. So that's our goal with this example. And so we're going to be leveraging Excel, and we're going to be leveraging Excel to read in some data from a table. And then we're going to use the rows or the records that we pull in from Excel to loop over and add accounts into our legacy invoicing system for every account that we find within this Excel sheet. So rather than me having to manually add an account for each individual that I get, I'm going to create the solution that if I get a dump of accounts, that I can load all of the accounts in at once using Power Automate. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into our scenario here. I actually have the flow that we've been working on over the last several examples already open, already ready to work on. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to walk through how to create a solution that allows us to do looping. Now, before we can just jump into the loop itself, we first need to find where is the information that we're going to loop over. Now, I told you just a moment ago, the information we're going to be looping over is in Excel. So to be able to read in data from Excel, we're going to first go up to the action section, and we're going to search for some of the Excel actions. You can see there's quite a few of them here. And the one that we're going to be using in this scenario is the Launch Excel action found right here. And we're going to go ahead and launch Excel right after we launch the Contoso invoicing application. Now, we don't just want to launch any Excel sheet. We actually want to launch an Excel workbook that already has some accounts in it. So just to show you what that looks like is I have an Excel sheet that looks like this. Pulling up on my screen right now, that just has simple 3 rows in it. It's not very complicated, not very big, but it could be hundreds of rows, thousands of rows even. And what we want to do is we want to iterate over each of the accounts listed here and load them into our legacy application. Just as a reminder, our legacy application that we've been using for these set of examples is the Contoso invoicing application that comes with the RPA in a day class files. That's a free class offered by Microsoft. A lot of partners deliver it, including Pragmatic Works. And I've included a link to the class files in the description here as well, so that way if you want to be able to get this application, you can do it and follow along. All right, so now that I have described the scenario here, I'm going to close these things out, and we want to pull in the data from this Excel sheet. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and launch Excel, but we don't want to launch a blank Excel workbook. We actually want to launch a specific workbook, the one we were just looking at. So we're going to launch and open the following document. And the document path that we're going to select is going to be pointed to the location that I just opened from. So I'm going to go ahead and find it here real quickly. It's going to be my presentation folder under Power Automate Desktop, and we'll select our looping example here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and select this Excel workbook. Now, when you select this workbook and I hit save, it's also going to create a new flow variable for me that's going to store the instance of Excel that we have open, because you could potentially have multiple instances of Excel open, so how does Power Automate know which one to read data in from? So you'll notice when I hit save, a new variable gets created as a flow variable on the right-hand side above my head that allows me to store the instance of Excel that I want to pull information from, which is helpful because what we're going to do next is we're going to tell Power Automate that we want to read in data from Excel, and it's got to know which Excel to pull that data from. So that variable is going to be helpful here in just a moment. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to tell Power Automate that we want to get the first free column/row, that's the option you see right here, from an Excel workbook. And the reason why we want to do that is we want to be able to capture where the data is at, and where does the data stop, So that way we can tell our loop when it can stop looping. So how does our loop know when to stop iterating? It knows because we're going to be able to capture and find what's the last row of data we have in our data set. So we're going to go ahead and bring in the get first free row / column from Excel workbook. And I'm going to drop that right underneath the launch Excel option. And you'll notice that it's already picked up our flow variable called Excel instance, and it's automatically using that. That's perfect. That's actually what we want. You don't have to do anything else here, but what's going to happen is 2 new variables are going to be created, one called first free column and the second one called first free row, that are going to store where is the first free available column or row where there is no data. And that's, again, how we know when we want to stop doing our iterating or our looping. So nothing really to configure here. It's already done the configuration for us. It's picked up the Excel instance, and we'll hit save. All right. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to read the information from that Excel workbook. So we're going to use the option here called Read from Excel Workbook. Let's see if we can find it here. Yeah, right here. So we're going to go ahead and select Read from Excel Workbook and drag that right below Get First Free Column / row. All right, so we'll drop that in. And we're going to do a few things a little bit more advanced. I'm going to go ahead and expand the advanced menu here. We're going to work on and do a few things here a little bit differently. Actually, I don't think I need the advanced menu, but we're going to do a few things a little differently here when we get to the retrieval property here. The Excel instance is still the same, so nothing to change there. We're going to use our flow variable. But for the retrieval, we're going to change this to values from a range of cells. So we want to basically select a range of cells we want to pull back data from. So we're going to select values from a range of cells. And the start column, the first column that we want to pull data from, is going to be the first column. So we can use the number 1 here. There's also some lettering you can do as well, but we're going to use column 1 is the first row of data we want to pull from. First column of data we want to pull from. Also, start on row 1 is going to be the first row of data that we want to pull from. And then for the end column, how do we tell where we want to stop reading in from? We can tell that by selecting our variable. Remember, we had a variable called first free column and first free row. That's over here above my head right here. We're going to use those 2 variables to tell Power Automate when we want to stop reading the data in from our solution. So our end column is actually going to pull from our variable called first free column. That's right here. And we don't want the first free column because remember the first free column is actually going to be blank. So we want the first free column -1. So with inside of the percent signs, we're going to do -1 to tell it that we want to take the first free column but subtract 1 from it. Go back 1 column. We're going to do the same thing for the first free row or the end row. We're going to select that we want the first free row to be returned back, and we're going to again subtract 1 from it. So that way it returns back the last row that actually has data in it. Don't give me the blank row at the end of it. Give me the row right before that is essentially what we're saying here. All right. So things are looking good here. We're going to go ahead and take this as is. We'll hit save, but notice here it's going to create another variable is produced called Excel data. And so this is going to store the range of data into a data table for us that we can then iterate over as we get further along through our example. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hit save. You'll see that another new variable pop in here on the right, this time called Excel data, that we'll be using as we continue forward with this example. All right, so we've got the building blocks here to be able to pull in data from Excel, read it, store it. Now the next step is going to be the looping part. So how do we configure our loop with inside of our existing flow that we have? And the way that we're going to do that, there are several different loops in here, by the way. If you go searching for loop, you actually won't even find the loop that we're interested in doing. You'll see there are loop and loop condition. These are kind of like while loops that you can say, where you can say, I want to loop a certain number of times. But what we want to do is more of like a for each loop, which is not called a loop. It's actually just called for each. So if I search for each, you'll see the loop. It is a type of loop. It's in the loops category, but it's not called a loop here. It's just called for each. It is a loop. So what for each means is it's going to take each row, and for each row, what do you want to do? What kind of operations you want to do? And what we want to do is we want each row to run through this process we already have here of inserting the account. So that's what we're trying to do here with the for each loop, is iterate over each one of those 3 rows that we have in our Excel file and run it through the process that we have here. All right, so our next step then is we're going to drag the for each loop right down here above where our process begins of inserting the account. And I'm going to drop that right there. And then from within inside the for each loop, we're going to configure it and tell it the value that we want to iterate over. So what we wanted to iterate over is going to be our Excel data. So we have that Excel data file. We can go ahead and select Excel data here as the option, the value to iterate over. And then what it's going to output is another variable called current item. Now, what Excel data stores in it is kind of like an array. It's a list of all of the values that we have, but what's going to be outputted from the for each loop is each individual value stored within inside of this current item variable. So you'll know which value is being currently loaded because it's going to be stored in the current item variable. All right. So we're going to go ahead and hit save here. That will create our for each loop, and then everything that's between these two kind of tealish colored options, that is what's going to be looped. And right now we have nothing between those two options. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these actions that we have and we're going to drag and drop those into our for each loop. And it'll take just a moment, but you'll see those will kind of drag and drop and plug themselves into our for each loop nicely as you see here. So everything within inside those teal blocks are going to be part of our loop. Okay? So we're getting close. We have our loop set up, but now we need to ensure that our flow actually loads the proper values, because right now you can see our flow is still pointing to these variables that we created in the previous video. What we need to do is we're actually going to switch. Instead of loading from a variable, we're going to load from a different variable. Instead of loading from these individual variables, we're going to load from the current item variable. So that way it'll load the current row that it happens to be working on. All right, so we're going to edit our first action here that loads in the company name, and we'll go ahead and select that we want to edit this like so. And what we're going to do is inside of this action, we're going to specify that we want to replace the variable that we have here right now with the current item variable. So we got rid of that. We're going to select the variable, and the variable we're going to use is the current item variable that you see right here. So we're going to go ahead and double click on the current item variable. Now, one thing that's unique about this is we want to make sure that it pulls back a specific column from that variable. So that variable is storing a row, but it has 3 columns to that row. So if we want it to return back a specific column, then what you can do, check this out. I'm going to zoom in on this for you. You can actually go within the variable expression here itself, and you can specify the column name that you want to return back. And you do that with inside brackets, and you usually put single quotes around it as well. So what we want to do is we want to return back the company name column from within inside of that variable. Okay? So it's going to look something like this as you go to type it in. Let me zoom out in case it gets a little blurry for you. But we're saying from this variable, bring back the company name column. So that's what we're doing here within the context of this example here. So we'll go ahead and hit save. And notice what it does. It still identifies the current item variable, but it even says right to the right of it that we're pulling back the company name column. All right, so we're going to do this 2 more times. I'm going to go down here, edit, get rid of this variable we did from our previous video. We're going to replace it with current item, and then we're going to plug in the column name. In this case, the column name would be contact name. So I'm not coming up with these column names out of thin air. These column names are actually ones that are found within our Excel sheet. So if I go look at our Excel sheet, I'm pulling the column names from right here. Okay? All right, so that's how you know where I'm getting those column names from. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and specify in this case that the column that we want to return back is going to be our contact name. So I'm going to type in contact name right here and hit save. And again, we have to do this one more time for our contact email now. We'll get rid of that. We'll do current item. And within inside of this, we're going to tell it that we want to return back the contact email, which is the column name for my final column that we have. All right, so we'll hit save on that. All right, and we're looking pretty good. So I think we're in good shape here. Everything is coming together quite nicely. I'm just checking my notes because there are a lot of steps on this, so I want to make sure I have everything ready to go. I think we have just about everything ready to go. The only thing that I'm going to kind of finally add to the end of this is I'm going to plug in a little text box or a message box to tell me what the value is that it's working on. So that way we know that our loop is actually functioning properly. So if we realize we made a mistake, we can see a pop-up here while we're debugging to let us know that there's an issue. So I'm going to use a display message. And I'm going to drag and drop the display message right here. And this display message action will allow me to kind of plug in some kind of pop-up to let me know if everything's working fine. And so what we can do is we can give the display message title. It's just like a pop-up like you would have with any application. So I can say this is something like account validation. And then I can plug in a message here that says something like your account was added. This message will close in 5 seconds. And then we could even plug in something like the account ID that was created. We could plug that in here as a variable, because remember, we have an account ID output variable that comes out of our flow. All right, so looking pretty good here. A couple other things we could do to set up in here. You can do an OK button to go ahead and close it out. You'll notice I said that, hey, it'll close on its own in 5 seconds. So you could actually say close message box automatically in 5 seconds. So there's a little option there to do that. But everything else I think here looks okay. So I think we'll go ahead and leave this as is. We'll make this more of an informational box and then hit save. And I think we're in good shape. We're about ready to go ahead and run this and test it out. Now, you'll notice one thing to pay attention to, the way that we've done our loop, is that the app itself will close after all the looping has been completed. So you'll notice at the very end, it's going to wait 5 more seconds when everything is done. This is outside of the loop, so this means once the loop is done, it's going to wait an additional 5 seconds, and then it's going to close the application after all the looping has completed. So let's go ahead and save this. And we're going to run this to test and validate that our looping is implemented properly. So let's go ahead and run this. I'm going to take my hands off the keyboard. It's launching our Contoso invoicing app. It's also launched our Excel sheet, read in the data from Excel. Now it's starting to go through. Oh, we have an error. So company name, oh, I think I know what our issue is. So I kind of purposely made a little mistake here to kind of show you one thing that you might need to consider and look at as you do this. But you can see here that we have an error message. It says the column or property company name was not found. And the reason for this is there are some properties here whenever you go to say that you want to read in data, there are some properties in here to actually specify that the first line is my column names. So this is the reason I kind of purposely did this is because it is something I forgot the first time I was learning this, is that if you are going to call out specific column names like we did, then you need to also make sure that you tell Power Automate whenever you're reading in the data that the first line of your data has the column names itself. So whenever it went to try and read in right here, it tried to find the column called company name, it wasn't able to find it, and so it errored out on us. So again, the fix for that is we're going to come up to where it says read from Excel data. We're going to expand under advanced, and we'll say that we want to have the first line of range contains our column name. So we'll go ahead and check that off, hit save. We'll save this again. I'm going to close our Excel sheet and our Contoso invoicing app so we can run it from the beginning. And then we'll try it again and show you how this works now. All right, so let's let it run. Contoso invoicing app has launched. Excel has launched. It's read in our data from Excel. It should be getting into our loop now. There it goes. It's read in our first row of data. Okay, there's our information box. Remember we asked it to pop that up earlier. It's popped that up here for 5 seconds. Now it disappears. It's entering in our second row of data called Cyber Hotspot. Information box pops up again, tells us the account ID that was created as part of that. Now it's going through our final loop, Hillside Retirement. And then we're going to get our last pop-up of account ID of 115. Looks like it worked perfectly. It's going to close that. After 5 seconds, it's going to close our Contoso invoicing app. And we could have also told it to close the Excel sheet if we wanted to as well. So to kind of put a bow on this at the end, you can actually tell it that you want it to close Excel. Once you're done with this, there is an Excel close action here. I'm going to go ahead and drop that towards the end. And that way we can have Excel not left open as well. Now you'll notice that it's pulling the variable called Excel instance. We've used that a couple times, so I'm not going to explain that again. But you could tell it whenever it goes to close Excel that you want to save what you've done. In this case, we haven't really done anything. We've just read data from it, so we don't need to save it. So we'll just hit that we want to add that extra little action in here to ensure that everything is kind of wrapped up in a bow at the end. So it's almost like nothing happened. We close the Excel sheet at the very end, and we're good to go. So in this video, a little bit lengthier one, but you learned how to implement looping within inside of your Power Automate desktop solutions using the for each loop container option here. You learned that there are other types of loops. There's a regular loop that acts more like a while loop, where it'll essentially loop a certain number of times rather than over a certain amount of data. So there's different kinds of loops that you can play around with. But in this one, we learned about the for each loop. Hope you enjoyed this one. We're going to have another final video in this series talking about subflows. And we have a great scenario here for a subflow where we can kind of package things up and make this a little bit easier for anyone else that might come in after us to be able to understand what's going on by implementing subflows. So we're going to explore subflows in our next and final video in this series. Hope you've enjoyed this so far. Again, you can of course check out our RPA in a Day class if you're interested in going deeper into robotic process automation with Power Automate. But that's it for this one. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.